Audiobook The Crimson Key by the Third Library. Introduction: The Waste of Fire. In the foundations of physical law lies a principle so absolute that even the mystic cannot argue with it. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. This is not philosophy. This is thermodynamics. This is the architecture of the universe speaking through the language of mathematics. And yet in the theater of human consciousness, millions upon millions of souls violate this law daily, attempting the impossible, trying to annihilate their own energy because it arrives wearing a mask they have been taught to fear. They call this mask anger. They call it grief. They call it fear. And in their desperation to destroy what cannot be destroyed, they become the very waste they sought to eliminate. The conventional approach to negative emotion is a war of attrition against the self. When anger rises, the modern human either suppresses it beneath layers of false serenity, pushing it down into the basement of the body where it ferments into disease, or they detonate it outward in an explosion that destroys relationships, careers, and the delicate architecture of their own lives. Both approaches are forms of energy waste. Both are the equivalent of taking high-grade fuel and either burying it in the ground or setting it on fire in an empty field. The energy was there. The potential was there. But the conductor was untrained, and so the power was lost. The alchemist operates from a different paradigm entirely. When the alchemist feels the volcanic heat of rage moving through his chest, he does not label it as enemy or ally. He recognizes it for what it truly is: raw voltage seeking a circuit. The alchemist does not ask, "How do I make this feeling go away?" He asks, "Where shall I direct this river?" This is the fundamental shift that separates the master from the slave. The slave is controlled by his emotions. The master uses them as fuel. The slave says, "I am angry." The master says, "I have anger and I will assign it a task." Consider the internal combustion engine that powers the vehicle you drive. It operates on a series of controlled explosions. Gasoline, a highly volatile and dangerous substance, is injected into a chamber where it is ignited in a violent burst of expanding gases. This explosion, if left uncontained, would tear the engine apart. But because it occurs within a precisely engineered cylinder, because the force is directed through pistons and gears, that same destructive power becomes locomotion. The car moves. You arrive at your destination. The explosion was not eliminated. It was not suppressed. It was directed. Your soul operates on the same principle. The negative emotions you experience are not errors in the code of consciousness. They are high-octane fuel deposits. Anger is a controlled explosion demanding change. Grief is the deep combustion that expands your capacity. Fear is the high-voltage current that sharpens focus to a laser point. These are not obstacles to manifestation. These are the accelerants. These are the substances that, when properly transmuted, move the machine of your life faster than the gentle warmth of contentment ever could. The Crimson Key is the operator's manual for this internal engine. It is not a book about positive thinking, because positive thinking is merely switching from premium fuel to regular. It works, but you are limiting your horsepower. This is a manual for learning to burn everything. This is the instruction set for becoming an engine that runs on rage, on heartbreak, on terror, and transmutes each of these into forward motion. This is the art of turning lead into gold, and the lead is your pain. For too long, the metaphysical community has operated under a dangerous delusion. That manifestation requires a sustained state of high-vibration joy, that you must feel good to attract good, that negative emotions create negative reality. This is a half-truth, and half-truths are the most dangerous lies because they contain just enough accuracy to be believed. Yes, sustained negativity creates negative patterns, but only when the energy is left raw and undirected. A spinning turbine generates electricity. A spinning turbine disconnected from the grid generates nothing but noise and heat. The turbine is not the problem. The lack of conductive infrastructure is the problem. What you are about to learn is how to build that infrastructure within yourself. You will learn to become a conductor of such efficiency that you waste nothing. Not your joy, not your rage, not your terror, not your grief. You will learn to take the screaming chaos of emotional pain and run it through the transformative coils of conscious intention until it emerges as pure thrust. This is not repression. This is not denial. This is recognition that the universe does not care what fuel you use. It only cares that you move. The world is full of people who have been defeated by their own abundance. They had so much anger, so much grief, so much fear, and they stood in the warehouse of this fuel and froze, not knowing how to light the furnace. Or worse, they lit it without a chimney and burned down everything they had built. You will not be one of these people. You are holding the crimson key, and with it you will learn to unlock the furnace door, to regulate the flame, to direct the heat exactly where it needs to go. This is not a gentle path. Alchemy never is. The laboratory gets hot. The substances bubble and smoke. There is a moment in the transmutation process where everything looks like it is getting worse, where the mixture turns black and foul before the gold begins to separate. You will have to sit with your darkness longer than is comfortable. You will have to feel the heat building instead of releasing the pressure valve. You will have to trust the process while your entire nervous system screams for relief. But on the other side of this threshold is a kind of power that the positive thinking devotee will never access because they have neutered their engine in the name of peace. Your suffering was never meant to be wasted. Every moment of pain you have endured was a delivery of raw material. The universe has been stockpiling fuel in your basement, and you have been treating it like garbage, trying to haul it away as quickly as possible. But the alchemist sees the pile of coal and thinks only of the warmth it will bring, the machines it will run, the distance it will carry him. Your past pain is not a burden, it is a resource, and now you will learn to spend it. The Crimson Key operates on a simple premise that violates the soft spirituality of the modern age. High-voltage negative emotion, when properly conducted, manifests faster than low-voltage positive emotion. A person in terror can envision catastrophe with more clarity, more emotional intensity, more sensory detail than most people can envision their dreams. This is evidence of their power, not their weakness. They are master visualizers using the wrong blueprint. The solution is not to lower the voltage. The solution is to redirect the current. In the pages that follow, you will learn the specific techniques for transmuting each category of dense emotion into thrust. You will learn why anger is the boundary setter that breaks chains. You will learn why grief carves the vessel that can later hold joy. You will learn why fear is simply intense manifestation running in reverse. You will learn the exact process for taking sexual energy, the most powerful creative force available to the human organism, and redirecting it upward to fuel genius and charisma instead of dissipating it in momentary pleasure. You will learn all of this not as abstract theory but as operational method. By the time you complete this transmission, you will be an engine that can run on anything. The world will no longer have the power to hurt you because every blow will simply be more fuel. Rejection becomes thrust. Betrayal becomes thrust. Loss becomes thrust. Failure becomes thrust. You will have achieved the untouchable state, not because nothing bad happens to you, but because you have learned to turn everything into combustion. The alchemist does not seek a life of only sunshine. He seeks a strong fire, and he feeds that fire with everything. Do not waste another tear. Do not waste another sleepless night of anxiety. Do not waste another day of smoldering resentment. These are your inheritance. These are your resources. And now finally you will learn to spend them wisely. The furnace is cold. The fuel is stacked and waiting. All that remains is to light the match and begin the great work. Welcome to the Crimson Key. The transmutation begins now. Thastufard, Chapter 1. The Myth of Bad Energy. Before you can become the alchemist, you must first dismantle the lie that has been installed in your operating system since childhood, the belief that certain energies are inherently bad. This belief is the primary obstruction to your power. It is the mental virus that causes you to reject your own fuel supply. Once you understand that energy itself has no moral quality, that it is merely force-seeking direction, you will stop being afraid of yourself. And when you stop being afraid of yourself, you become dangerous in the most productive sense of the word. The word emotion breaks down into its etymological components as energy in motion. This is not poetic metaphor. This is mechanical description. An emotion is literally a current of energy moving through your system, generated by your perception of circumstances, amplified by your nervous system, and seeking expression or resolution. The energy itself has no agenda. It has no preference. It is simply voltage looking for ground. Whether that grounding happens constructively or destructively depends entirely on the conductor, which is you. Consider electricity, the invisible force that powers the modern world. Electricity does not care about your survival. It will light your home with the same indifference that it will stop your heart if you touch a live wire. The electrical current running through the grid right now could charge your phone or kill you, and the electrons involved are identical in both scenarios. The difference is not in the energy. The difference is in the infrastructure that conducts it. The same principle applies to the energy we call emotion. When anger moves through your body, it creates a cascade of physiological responses. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your pupils dilate. Adrenaline floods your bloodstream. This is a massive energetic event. Your body is literally generating power, marshalling resources, preparing for action. This state could fuel the destruction of a relationship through words you cannot take back, or it could fuel 72 hours of focused work that changes your financial reality forever. The anger is the same. The outcome depends on where you point it. Yet you have been trained to view this power as a problem. You have been taught that anger is dangerous, that it makes you a bad person, that spiritual advancement means transcending it entirely. This teaching serves whoever benefits from your passivity. A population that fears its own anger is a population that will not revolt, will not demand better, will not set boundaries, will not fight back. The teaching that anger is inherently negative is a control mechanism, not a spiritual truth. The enlightened being does not transcend anger, he becomes its master. The same principle applies to grief, to fear, to jealousy, to sexual desire, to every emotion that the modern spiritual marketplace has labeled as low vibration and therefore undesirable. These labels are lies wrapped in just enough truth to be swallowed. Yes, chronic negative emotion creates negative patterns in your life, but only because you have been taught to leave the energy raw and undirected. You have been taught to either suppress it, which is like capping a volcano, or to indulge it, which is like opening the dam with no turbines installed. Both approaches waste the power. The metaphysical community has done tremendous damage by promoting the idea that you must raise your vibration through forced positivity. They tell you to avoid negative thoughts, to immediately reframe anything unpleasant into a gratitude exercise, to suppress your legitimate rage and grief beneath affirmations that feel hollow in your mouth. This creates a spiritual bypass, a psychological defense mechanism, where you use spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with uncomfortable feelings. And beneath that bypass, the energy accumulates like water behind a dam, increasing pressure until something ruptures. True alchemical practice does not bypass the negative. It digests it. It takes the raw ore of painful emotion and subjects it to such intense heat and pressure that its structure changes at the molecular level. What emerges is not the original emotion in disguised form. It is a completely different substance. Lead does not become gold by painting the lead gold-colored. Lead becomes gold through transmutation, a fundamental change in atomic structure. This is what you will learn to do with your pain. Understand this clearly. The universe is not offended by your anger. Source consciousness, God, the quantum field, whatever name you assign to the creative force, it does not judge your emotional state. It only responds to the clarity and intensity of your focus. A person who focuses on poverty with intense fear will manifest poverty. A person who focuses on wealth with intense anger at their current poverty will manifest wealth, often faster, because the anger provides more voltage than contentment ever could. The focus is what matters. The intensity is what matters. The moral quality you assign to the emotion is irrelevant to the mechanics of manifestation. When you label an emotion as bad, you create internal conflict. Part of you is generating the emotion because emotions arise from your perception of circumstances, not from moral failure, and another part of you is trying to destroy that emotion because you have been taught it is unacceptable. This internal war consumes enormous amounts of energy. It is like running your engine and your brakes simultaneously. The vehicle shudders, overheats, and goes nowhere. You end up exhausted, still feeling the emotion you tried to eliminate, and now you also feel shame about feeling it. This is the toxicity of the positivity movement. It does not eliminate negative emotion, it adds shame to it. The alchemist operates from a different paradigm. When anger arises, he does not say, "I should not feel this." He says, "I am feeling high voltage demand for change. Where shall I direct this power?" When fear arises, he does not say, "I must replace this with faith." He says, "I am experiencing intense visualization of unwanted outcomes. I will maintain this intensity but change the image." When grief arises, he does not say, "I need to move on." He says, "I am being carved deeper so that I can hold more light. I will sit in this expansion." This reframe is not semantic gameplaying. It is a fundamental shift in relationship to your own energy. You move from being a victim of your emotions to being the operator of an internal power plant. You stop asking, "How do I feel better?" and start asking, "How do I use this?" The first question keeps you small, dependent on external circumstances to regulate your internal state. The second question makes you sovereign, capable of transforming any input into forward motion. The myth of bad energy is maintained by those who benefit from your self-suppression. It is maintained by pharmaceutical companies that profit when you medicate your anger instead of directing it. It is maintained by spiritual teachers who sell you peace as a product while sitting on unprocessed rage. It is maintained by systems of control that require your compliance and fear your power. When you believe that your negative emotions are evidence of spiritual failure, you become easy to manage. When you recognize them as fuel, you become ungovernable. Every master manifestor in history has understood this principle, though they may not have articulated it in these terms. They understood that desire, even desperate desire, is fuel. That rage against injustice is fuel. That fear of failure is fuel. They did not waste time trying to feel positive before they took action. They took action using whatever energy was available, and the motion itself generated momentum, and the momentum eventually generated more refined emotions. But they began with the raw material. They began with what was real. You have been walking around with a nuclear reactor in your chest, trying to keep it shut down because you were told it was dangerous. And it is dangerous. To your old patterns, to your limitations, to your excuses, to everyone who benefits from your smallness. But it is not dangerous to your dreams. It is the very thing that will power them. The question is not whether you should feel negative emotions. You are human. You will feel them. The question is whether you will continue to waste them, or whether you will finally learn to burn them for thrust. The first step in any alchemical process is the recognition of the material. You must see clearly what you are working with. You are not working with good energy or bad energy. You are working with energy. High voltage, low voltage, smooth current, jagged current. These are technical distinctions, not moral ones. A lightning bolt is not evil. A gentle stream is not holy. They are both water moving through a circuit, responding to pressure and conductivity. Your emotions operate under the same natural laws. Release the myth. Embrace the mechanics. You are not a spiritual being having a human experience, struggling against your lower nature. You are a conductor in human form, learning to channel increasingly high voltage without burning out the circuits. Your negative emotions are not evidence that you are doing it wrong. They are evidence that you are alive, that you are perceiving contrast, that you have desires, that you have energy. Now you will learn to stop wasting that evidence and start spending it like the currency it is. The alchemist sees a forest fire and thinks of cleared land, nutrient-rich ash, space for new growth. The civilian sees only destruction. Same fire, different perspective, different outcome. Your anger is a forest fire. Your grief is a forest fire. Your fear is a forest fire. You can either run from it screaming about the tragedy, or you can wait for the smoke to clear and plant seeds in the ash. The choice, as always, has been yours. You simply did not know you had it. Now you do. Chapter 2. The Furnace of Anger. Anger is the most misunderstood and misused emotion in the human repertoire. It has been demonized by spiritual traditions, pathologized by psychology, and weaponized by the unconscious. And yet, properly understood and directed, anger is the single most powerful force for rapid transformation available to the human being. Anger is the vibration of, "I refuse this reality." It is the alarm system that alerts you when a boundary has been violated. It is the furnace that generates the heat necessary to break the molecular bonds of your current circumstance and rearrange them into something new. The conventional approach to anger is suppression disguised as maturity. You are taught that anger is childish, that adults control themselves, that getting angry means you have lost. This teaching creates a population of people who swallow their rage until it ferments into depression, resentment, and passive-aggressive behavior that destroys relationships more thoroughly than any outburst ever could. Suppressed anger does not disappear. It goes underground. It becomes the acid that eats through the foundation of your life from below, invisible until the structure collapses. The other common approach is explosion, the uncontrolled venting of rage that leaves casualties and regret in its wake. This is anger used as a weapon against others, fired indiscriminately, providing momentary relief but creating long-term destruction. The person who explodes their anger feels powerful in the moment and ashamed afterward. They have spent high-grade fuel to produce nothing but smoke and damage. This is not mastery. This is waste. This is a forest fire with no plan for what to plant in the ash. The alchemist does neither. The alchemist recognizes anger as concentrated energy demanding application. When anger rises, it is because some part of your consciousness has detected an intolerable gap between what is and what should be. Your current income versus what you know you are worth. Your current relationship versus the respect you know you deserve. Your current body versus the vitality you know is possible. This gap creates friction, and friction creates heat, and heat can either burn everything down or run an engine. The choice is in the channeling. Anger is the emotional equivalent of rocket fuel, highly volatile, incredibly powerful, and capable of achieving escape velocity from any gravitational pull if properly directed. The person trapped in poverty, who accesses their rage at being trapped, can channel that fury into 80-hour work weeks, into skill acquisition, into relentless networking, into the kind of obsessive focus that refuses to stop until the situation changes. That same person, taught to let go of their anger through meditation and acceptance, often remains trapped, having traded their fuel for false peace. The key distinction is between hot anger and cold anger. Hot anger is reactive, explosive, and short-lived. It feels good to express but produces minimal useful work. Cold anger is sustained, focused, and directional. It is the slow burn that can be maintained for months or years, that wakes you up at 4 in the morning to work while your competitors sleep, that keeps you moving forward when motivation has long since evaporated. Cold anger is not about screaming. It is about refusing systematically and relentlessly to accept your current limitations. Consider the person who has been betrayed by a partner, by a business associate, by a trusted friend. The conventional spiritual teaching tells them to forgive, to release, to understand that holding anger only hurts themselves. This teaching, while containing some truth, often arrives too early in the process. Before forgiveness can be authentic, before release can be real, the energy must be processed. The anger must be felt, acknowledged, and transmuted. To skip directly to forgiveness is to perform a spiritual bypass that leaves the wound unhealed and the energy unexpressed. The alchemical approach is different. Feel the anger fully. Sit with the heat of it. Acknowledge that you have been wronged, that the violation was real, that your rage is justified. And then, instead of directing that rage at the person who wronged you, which gives them power and keeps you bound to them energetically, direct it at the circumstance. Let your anger at betrayal fuel your commitment to building something so solid that no betrayal can destroy it. Let your rage at deception fuel your development of discernment, so precise that you can see through masks before they ever fool you again. This is the transmutation. You take the heat generated by the violation and use it to forge stronger boundaries, sharper awareness, deeper self-reliance. The person who betrayed you becomes irrelevant. They were simply the delivery system for the fuel. The actual gift was the anger, the energy, the impetus for change. Without that betrayal, you might have remained complacent. The betrayal was the sledgehammer that broke you out of a comfortable prison. The anger is the engine that will carry you to somewhere better. Anger at injustice is particularly potent fuel. When you witness or experience something fundamentally unfair, systemic oppression, exploitation, cruelty, abuse of power, the anger that arises is righteous. This is not the petty anger of a bruised ego. This is the anger of a soul that recognizes deviation from natural law. This anger has toppled empires. This anger has fueled every civil rights movement, every revolution, every moment in history when the oppressed said no more and refused to continue accepting the unacceptable. The error is in letting that anger scatter into unfocused rage, protesting without strategy, complaining without solution, feeling righteous indignation without taking concrete action. This is masturbatory anger. It feels intense, but it produces nothing. The alchemist takes that same fury and asks, what can I build that makes this injustice impossible? If you are angry about poverty, build wealth and then create systems that lift others. If you are angry about ignorance, become learned and then teach. If you are angry about cruelty, become powerful enough to protect the vulnerable. Your anger is not the end point, it is the starting fuel. There is a particular quality to anger that makes it superior to many other emotions for rapid manifestation. It is inherently focused on change. When you are content, you want things to remain as they are. When you are sad, you are processing loss. When you are afraid, you are trying to avoid something. But when you are angry, you are demanding that reality shift. Anger is active. Anger is directional. Anger says, this must be different, and I will make it so. This is precisely the energetic stance required for manifestation. The technique for transmuting anger is straightforward, but requires practice. When you feel anger rising, do not suppress it, and do not express it outward. Instead, pause. Breathe into it. Let it build without discharging. Feel the heat in your chest, the tension in your muscles, the sharpness in your focus. This is energy accumulating. This is voltage increasing. Now, assign it a task. This anger will fuel my workout. This anger will fuel my work session. This anger will fuel my sales calls. Speak the assignment clearly in your mind, and then begin the action while the energy is still hot. You will notice something remarkable. The action you take while channeled anger is flowing through you has a different quality than the same action taken from a neutral state. You move faster. You think more clearly. You feel less fatigue. Obstacles that would normally discourage you become irrelevant because the anger says, I do not care about obstacles. I care about results. This is anger properly harnessed. This is the furnace running at full capacity, producing maximum thrust. Over time, as you practice this transmutation, you will develop the ability to summon cold anger at will. You will be able to access the energy of anger without needing an external trigger. You will remember past violations, past frustrations, past moments when you were dismissed or doubted or underestimated, and you will use those memories as kindling. You will build a controlled fire in your chest and keep it burning low and steady, available whenever you need a boost in energy or focus or determination. This is mastery. There is also a paradox here worth noting. As you become skilled at transmuting anger into productive action, you will find yourself getting angry less often. Not because you have transcended the emotion, but because you have eliminated many of the circumstances that generate it. When you use your anger at poverty to build wealth, you are no longer poor, and that particular anger source evaporates. When you use your anger at weakness to build strength, you are no longer weak. The fuel source dries up because you have consumed it and changed the underlying condition. This is proof that the transmutation is working. But there will always be new sources. Life will continue to present injustices, violations, frustrations, and gaps between what is and what should be. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system working as designed. You are meant to experience contrast, because contrast generates desire, and desire generates energy, and energy, when properly directed, generates change. The universe is not punishing you with challenges, it is fueling you with them. Every anger-generating situation is a delivery of raw material. Sign for the package and get to work. The alchemist does not seek a life without anger. He seeks a life where anger is never wasted. He seeks to become such an efficient conductor that no spark of rage ever dissipates into the air unused. He collects his anger like a miser collects gold, storing it, investing it, spending it only on purchases that return value. And over time he builds an empire on the backs of 1,000 small furies that would have destroyed a lesser person. The furnace of anger is not your enemy, it is your forge, and now you know how to use it. Chapter 3. The depth of grief. If anger is the furnace that generates heat for action, then grief is the excavation that creates capacity for joy. Grief is the emotion that most people misunderstand as purely destructive when it is, in fact, deeply constructive. Grief carves you. It hollows you out. It digs channels through your consciousness that did not exist before. And while this process is excruciating, what remains when the digging is complete is a vessel capable of holding more light, more love, more joy than you could have contained in your previous shallower form. The modern approach to grief is to medicate it, to rush through it, to move on as quickly as possible, as if grief were a roadblock instead of a road. You are given bereavement days as if 3 days is sufficient to process the loss of a parent. You are told that if you are still sad 6 months after a breakup, you need therapy. You are taught that grief is a problem to solve rather than a process to complete. This is cultural insanity, rooted in the terror of feeling. A society that has forgotten how to grieve is a society of shallow people, capable only of shallow joys. Grief arrives in many forms. There is the grief of death, the permanent absence of someone who shaped your world. There is the grief of betrayal, the death of who you thought someone was. There is the grief of lost opportunity, of time wasted, of dreams that will never be realized. There is even the grief of growth, the necessary death of old versions of yourself as you evolve into something new. All of these are forms of loss, and all loss must be grieved. To skip the grieving is to leave the corpse unburied, rotting in the basement of your consciousness. The metaphor of the well is precise. Imagine joy as water. A shallow person is like a bowl sitting on the surface of the earth. When joy water is poured into them, the bowl fills quickly, but it holds very little and any wind can spill it. A person carved deep by grief is like a well. The digging hurts, the going down into darkness hurts. But when that well is complete, it can hold an enormous volume of water. And the water, being below the surface, is protected from the wind. The grief you avoid to protect yourself from pain is the same grief that would allow you to feel profound joy later. You cannot selectively numb. You go deep or you stay shallow in everything. This is why people who have never suffered often seem superficial. They are not bad people. They simply have no depth. They have never been forced to excavate their own consciousness. They live on the surface where everything is pleasant, but nothing is profound. And when you, carved deep by loss, try to connect with them, you find there is nowhere to connect. They cannot meet you in the depths because they have no depths to meet you in. You are a well and they are a puddle. The puddle will evaporate in the heat. The well endures. The alchemist does not run from grief. He sits with it. He lets it work on him. He understands that grief is the chisel and he is the marble, and something more beautiful is being revealed through the chipping away of what is no longer needed. This requires a complete reframe of what grief means. Grief is not evidence that you loved unwisely or attached too much. Grief is evidence that you loved truly. Grief is the receipt that proves the value of what you had. The depth of your grief corresponds directly to the depth of your love. To avoid grief is to avoid love, and to avoid love is to live a grey half-life of safety and numbness. There is a technique the alchemist uses when grief arrives. He does not try to transform it immediately into something else. He lets it exist. He creates space for it. He might set aside an hour, light a candle, sit in silence and simply feel the weight of the loss. He might write letters to the person or version of himself that is gone. He might allow himself to cry until the well runs dry. This is not wallowing. This is processing. This is allowing the emotional energy to move completely through the system rather than damming it up. What happens when you suppress grief is that it calcifies. The pain that could have flowed through you in a few months of honest feeling instead becomes a permanent stone in your chest. You carry it everywhere. It affects every subsequent relationship because you are not fully present. Part of you is still back there, still attending to the unprocessed loss. The calcified grief becomes a weight that slows everything else down. It becomes the limp you do not consciously notice, but that affects your gait nonetheless. The transmutation of grief happens not through force, but through completion. You must grieve fully to grieve successfully. This means going all the way down into the dark. It means sitting with the reality of the loss without trying to reframe it into a lesson or a blessing prematurely. Yes, eventually you will extract wisdom. Yes, eventually the loss will reveal gifts. But first, you must honor the actual loss. Someone is gone. Something is over. A chapter has closed. This is real, and it is permitted to hurt. As you sit with grief, something remarkable begins to happen. The initial sharp pain, the pain that feels like it will kill you, eventually dulls into a deep ache. And the deep ache eventually becomes a quiet sadness. And the quiet sadness eventually becomes a tender spot that you can touch without falling apart. And finally, the tender spot becomes a scar. Still there, still real, but no longer actively painful. This is completion. This is the grief having moved through you entirely, having done its work of excavation, and now exiting to make room for what comes next. The depth created by grief is permanent. You do not lose it when the pain subsides. You keep the capacity. This means that someone who has grieved deeply can experience joy more intensely than they could before the loss. They can love more courageously because they have already survived the worst-case scenario. They can be present more fully because they understand viscerally that everything is temporary. The grief was the tuition. The depth is the degree, and the depth is yours forever. There is also a strange phenomenon that occurs after deep grief. The world becomes more vivid. Colors seem brighter. Food tastes more intense. Music moves you more easily. This is not imagination. This is your sensory apparatus functioning at higher resolution because it has been recalibrated by loss. When you brush against death, your own or someone else's, your nervous system wakes up. The parts of you that were sleepwalking through life suddenly become alert because you have been reminded that this is finite. Grief is the alarm clock that wakes you up to the miracle of being alive. The alchemist uses this heightened awareness as a gift. He moves through the world with the appreciation of someone who knows intimately that it can all end. He does not take for granted the people who remain. He does not waste days on trivial concerns. He has been to the bottom of the well, and from that vantage point, he can see clearly what matters and what does not. This clarity is worth the price of the descent. This is the gold that was always buried in the grief. One of the deepest griefs is the grief of self-loss, the realization that you have spent years being someone you are not, living a life that was not yours, pursuing goals that were imported rather than authentic. This grief is often dismissed as not real grief because no one died, but a version of you died. The person you could have been if you had been braver sooner has died, and this death must be mourned. You must sit with the weight of the wasted years, the unexpressed potential, the roads not taken. This is painful, but it is also clarifying. Once you have fully grieved who you were not, you can finally become who you are. The transmutation of grief into power happens at the scar stage. Once the grief has completed its work of excavation, once the pain has moved through and left you deeper than before, you can look back at the loss and see it differently. Not as meaningless suffering, but as the price of admission to depth. Not as punishment, but as initiation. You have been to the underworld and returned. You have died and been reborn. You are no longer the shallow person you were before the loss. You are the well, carved deep, capable of holding oceans. This new capacity is not just for your own joy, it is for others. A person who has grieved deeply can hold space for others in their grief in a way that the uncarved cannot. You can sit with someone in their pain without needing to fix it, without rushing them towards silver linings, without performing the toxic positivity that trivializes their experience. You can simply be present because you know that presence is the gift. You know that the only way out is through. And your calm, deep presence gives them permission to feel what they need to feel. Over time, you will accumulate griefs. This is not a flaw. This is a life fully lived. You will lose people and dreams and versions of yourself. Each loss will dig you deeper. Each excavation will expand your capacity. And eventually, you will become so deep that you can hold all of it, all the pain and all the joy, all the loss and all the love, all the death and all the life, simultaneously. You will become a container for the full spectrum of human experience. This is wholeness. This is mastery. The alchemist does not fear grief because he knows what it builds. He does not run from loss because he knows what it creates. When grief arrives, he opens the door, invites it in, asks it to stay as long as it needs. He knows that grief is a severe teacher, but a thorough one. He knows that nothing carves the soul like loss. And he knows that a soul uncarved is a soul unprepared for the fullness of life. The depth of grief you are willing to feel determines the height of joy you are capable of reaching. Do not waste your losses. Let them dig you deep. The well you become will serve you forever. Chapter 4. The Focus of Fear. Fear is the most misidentified emotion in the human catalogue. It is called weakness when it is actually misdirected strength. It is labeled as evidence of lack when it is proof of powerful creative capacity. Fear is intense visualization. When you are afraid, you are imagining a specific outcome with extraordinary clarity, emotional intensity, and sensory detail. You are seeing it, feeling it, believing it completely. This is not failure. This is mastery of the manifestation process. You are simply aiming at the wrong target. Consider what happens in your body and mind when fear activates. Your heart races. Your pupils dilate. Your focus narrows to a laser point on the perceived threat. All extraneous thoughts fall away. You are completely present, completely concentrated on the scenario you are imagining. This is the same state that peak performers spend years trying to achieve. Total absorption, total focus, total commitment of all mental and emotional resources to a single point. You reach this state effortlessly when you are afraid. You are a natural master. You are just using your mastery to create what you do not want. The conventional approach to fear is either avoidance or affirmation. You are told to avoid thinking about what you are afraid of, to distract yourself, to focus on the positive. Or you are told to replace the fear with affirmations, to repeat statements about how safe you are, how everything always works out, how the universe has your back. Both approaches miss the core opportunity. They attempt to lower the voltage when the voltage is the gift. They attempt to reduce intensity when intensity is required for powerful manifestation. The solution is not to fear less intensely. The solution is to redirect the intensity. Fear operates as reverse manifestation. You are using the full power of your consciousness to create, in vivid detail, the exact outcome you do not want. You are rehearsing failure. You are practicing catastrophe. You are running simulations of worst-case scenarios with such commitment that your nervous system cannot distinguish between imagination and reality. Your body responds as if the feared outcome is happening now. Cortisol floods your system. Your immune response dampens. Your digestive system shuts down. You are living the disaster before it occurs. This is how powerful you are. This is evidence of your capability, not your weakness. The alchemist recognizes this immediately. When fear arises, he does not shame himself for feeling it. He notes with interest that his consciousness is capable of generating intense, believable, detailed scenarios. He observes that his emotional system is responding with full commitment to an imagined future. He realizes that he is witnessing his own power in action. And then he asks the pivotal question. If I can create this level of intensity and clarity around what I do not want, what happens if I redirect this same intensity toward what I do want? This is the transmutation of fear. You do not eliminate the fear. You do not talk yourself out of it. You do not pretend it is not there. You acknowledge it as evidence of your ability to create reality through focused imagination, and then you consciously choose to apply that same ability to a different image. You keep the shaking. You keep the intensity. You keep the crystal clear visualization. You simply change what you are visualizing. The technical process is this: when fear arises, stop fighting it. Let it build. Feel your heart racing, your palms sweating, your focus narrowing. This is your consciousness gathering power. Now, in the midst of that intensity, deliberately shift the image. If you're afraid of failing at your business, stay in the fear body. Keep the shaking, keep the intensity, but begin visualizing the business succeeding with that same level of detail. See the sales coming in, feel the relief and pride, hear the notifications. Make it as real as the failure scenario was. Use the fear state as the energy source, but point it at success. This is not positive thinking. This is energy redirection. Positive thinking attempts to operate from a calm, neutral state, which often lacks the voltage necessary for rapid manifestation. Fear transmutation operates from a high voltage state, maintaining the power while changing the target. It is the difference between a weak bulb and a laser. Both produce light, but the laser, being focused and intense, can cut through steel. Your fear is already laser-focused. You are just burning through the wrong material. What you will discover through practice is that fear and excitement are physiologically nearly identical. The same racing heart, the same dilated pupils, the same heightened focus. The difference is the story you are telling about the sensation. Fear says, something terrible is about to happen. Excitement says, something amazing is about to happen. Same nervous system activation, different interpretation. This means you can relabel the sensation in real time. When your body starts sending fear signals, you can consciously interpret them as excitement signals instead. I am not afraid of this presentation. I am excited about this presentation. This shaking is enthusiasm, not terror. The alchemist takes this further. He begins to actively seek the fear sensation because he knows it indicates he is approaching something significant. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Fear is the indicator that you are at the edge of your current capacity, about to expand into something larger. Most people retreat when they feel fear. The alchemist advances toward it because he knows that everything he wants lives on the other side of the fear boundary. Fear is not a stop sign. Fear is a marker that says, growth available here. There is a particular type of fear worth examining, the fear of success. This fear is less discussed than fear of failure, but often more paralyzing. People sabotage themselves not because they are afraid they will fail, but because they are afraid they will succeed and then have to maintain that success, live up to new expectations, or become someone unfamiliar. This fear is the ego's attempt to maintain homeostasis, to keep you small and known rather than large and unknown. The transmutation here is to recognize that your current identity is not sacred. You are allowed to become someone new. The death of your small self is not tragedy. It is graduation. Another critical insight: fear is often generalized anxiety about future outcomes that have very specific, actionable solutions in the present. You are afraid you will run out of money. Break that down. What action could you take today that would improve your financial situation? Make that call. Send that email. Update that resume. The fear wants you paralyzed, imagining catastrophe. Action is the antidote. And when you take action while the fear energy is still active in your system, you are using the high voltage state to fuel productive motion. This is transmutation in real time. There is also the existential fear, the fear of death, of meaninglessness, of the void. This is the deepest fear, the one that underlies all other fears. Every fear of failure is ultimately a fear of annihilation. Every fear of rejection is ultimately a fear of being cast out to die. These ancient survival programs are still running in your nervous system. The alchemical approach is not to deny the reality of death, but to use the awareness of mortality as a focusing agent. You will die. Everyone you love will die. Nothing you build will last forever. Given this, what matters? What is worth doing with the limited time available? Fear of death, properly transmuted, becomes the fuel for living fully. The technique of staying in the fear body while changing the vision requires practice because your mind will want to either escape the sensation or maintain the negative image. Both are habits. You must train yourself to tolerate high-intensity sensation without needing to discharge it, and to consciously direct your imagination while in that state. Start small. Practice with minor fears. Feel the nervousness before a difficult conversation, and deliberately visualize the conversation going well while maintaining the nervous energy. Over time, you will be able to handle larger fears with the same technique. One of the most powerful applications of transmuted fear is in decision-making. When you are faced with a choice, and one option terrifies you more than the other, the terrifying option is usually the one aligned with your growth. Your ego fears change, fears expansion, fears anything that threatens its current structure, so it generates fear to keep you from choosing the growth path. The alchemist recognizes this and uses fear as a compass. Whichever direction generates the most fear is usually the direction that leads to the breakthrough. Not always, some fears are legitimate warnings, but often enough that fear becomes a useful indicator rather than a barrier. As you become skilled at this transmutation, you will notice a strange phenomenon. You will start to feel less fear overall, not because you have become fearless in the sense of never experiencing the sensation, but because you have rewired your relationship to it. Fear is no longer a stop sign. It is no longer evidence of danger or wrongness. It is simply intense energy available for use. When the alarm goes off, you do not panic. You note the energy spike and assign it a task. The fear becomes functional. It becomes fuel. And once something becomes fuel, it loses its power to control you. The ultimate goal is not to eliminate fear, but to become such an efficient conductor that fear passes through you without sticking, immediately transmuted into forward motion. The fear arises, you acknowledge it, you redirect its intensity toward your goal, and you move. No hesitation, no rumination, no paralysis, just recognition, redirection, action. This is how you become unstoppable, not by being without fear, but by being someone who can channel fear into thrust. The universe can throw anything at you, and you will just burn it for fuel. This is the mastery of fear. This is the alchemical state. Chapter 5. The suppression toxin. The metaphysical community has created a dangerous illusion, the belief that spiritual advancement requires the maintenance of a positive emotional state at all times. This teaching, though well-intentioned, has produced a generation of spiritual practitioners who are profoundly disconnected from their own authentic experience. They have learned to plaster a smile over genuine pain, to perform gratitude while feeling resentment, to speak affirmations while their nervous system screams distress. This is not healing. This is spiritual bypassing, and it creates a toxin more dangerous than the negative emotions it attempts to suppress. Understand this clearly. Energy must go somewhere. The first law of thermodynamics applies to emotional energy as surely as it applies to heat. When you generate anger, grief, or fear and then suppress it, pushing it down, denying its existence, covering it with false positivity, the energy does not disappear, it goes underground. It sinks into your tissues, your organs, your nervous system. It becomes the somatic script, the body's record of unexpressed emotion. And eventually, if not processed, it becomes disease. The correlation between suppressed emotion and physical illness is not metaphorical. It is mechanical. Chronic suppression of anger has been linked to hypertension, heart disease, and autoimmune disorders. Suppressed grief lodges in the lungs and manifests as respiratory issues. Suppressed fear creates digestive problems, chronic anxiety disorders, and adrenal fatigue. Your body is keeping score. Your body is speaking the truth that your mind refuses to acknowledge. Every symptom is a message. Every disease is suppressed emotional energy that has calcified into matter. The toxic positivity movement teaches you to respond to legitimate pain with spiritual platitudes. Everything happens for a reason. The universe never gives you more than you can handle. You create your own reality, so if something bad happened, you manifested it. These statements, even when technically true from a certain metaphysical perspective, are violence when applied prematurely to someone in acute pain. They are bypasses. They are ways to avoid sitting with discomfort, your own or someone else's. They are spiritual materialism disguised as wisdom. When you tell yourself you should feel grateful when you actually feel angry, you create internal warfare. Part of you is generating a legitimate response to a genuine injustice, and another part of you is attacking that response as unspiritual. This splits you. You become fragmented. One part performs the spiritual script, while the other part seethes in the basement. And the part that seethes does not go away simply because you refuse to acknowledge it. It grows stronger in the dark. It feeds on your denial. It becomes your shadow. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is the repository of all the parts of yourself you have deemed unacceptable. Every emotion you have suppressed, every impulse you have denied, every aspect of your personality you have banished, these go into the shadow. And the shadow does not remain passive. It leaks. It sabotages. It acts out in ways you do not consciously recognize. The spiritual teacher who preaches love while being cruel to his students has a shadow. The positivity influencer who smiles on camera while abusing substances in private has a shadow. The person who claims to have transcended anger while being passive-aggressive with everyone around them has a shadow. Alchemy requires integration, not suppression. You cannot transmute what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot work with the raw material if you pretend it does not exist. The first step in any alchemical process is observation, looking clearly at what is actually present. If you are angry, you must admit you are angry. If you are grieving, you must acknowledge the grief. If you are afraid, you must sit with the fear. Only then can you begin the work of transmutation. Denial is not the beginning of transformation. It is the refusal to begin. The practice of authentic feeling is simple but challenging for those who have been trained in bypass. When an emotion arises, you stop. You do not immediately reframe it. You do not rush to affirmations. You do not spiritual bypass your way out of it. You sit with it. You feel where it lives in your body. You breathe into it. You let it exist without needing to fix it. This is radical honesty. This is the courage to be with what is true, rather than what you wish were true. What happens when you allow yourself this honesty is that the emotion begins to move. Emotions are called emotions because they are meant to move. Energy in motion. When you suppress them, you stop the motion. The energy becomes stuck, stagnant, toxic. When you allow them, they flow, they arise, they peak, they subside. This is the natural cycle, but you can only trust this cycle if you stop interfering with it. You must allow the wave to crest and fall, rather than building a dam to hold it back. The dam analogy is precise. When you suppress emotion, you are building a dam. The water, energy, accumulates behind it. Pressure builds. More and more water collects. The dam must be reinforced constantly, which requires enormous energy. You spend your days maintaining the dam, keeping the water contained, terrified of what would happen if it broke, and eventually it does break. The pressure becomes too great, and the dam ruptures and everything you have been holding back floods out in a destructive torrent. This is why people who seem so positive suddenly explode in rage. This is why the person who never shows emotion eventually has a complete breakdown. The dam broke. The alchemist does not build dams. He builds channels. He allows the water to flow through him in controlled ways. When anger arises, he feels it, acknowledges it, and directs it toward productive action. When grief arises, he sits with it, processes it, and allows it to carve him deeper. When fear arises, he uses its intensity to fuel focused visualization of desired outcomes. The emotions move through him without getting stuck. He is a conductor, not a container. Nothing accumulates, nothing becomes toxic. There is also the question of performance. the exhausting maintenance of a false persona. When you commit to toxic positivity, you must constantly monitor and adjust your expression. You cannot let anyone see the pain, because that would shatter the illusion. You become an actor playing the role of someone who has transcended struggle. This requires enormous energy. Energy that could be used for actual growth, actual creation, actual life is instead spent maintaining the mask. And the cost of this performance is intimacy. No one can know you because you are not showing them the truth of yourself. You are showing them a carefully curated performance. True connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires honesty about the full spectrum of your experience. The people who can sit with you in your pain without needing to fix it, who can witness your anger without being threatened by it, who can hold space for your fear without rushing you toward faith, these are your people. The ones who need you to be positive all the time are not your people. They are the audience for your performance, and as soon as you drop the act, they will leave. Let them. The exhaustion of performing transcendence is not worth the shallow approval it generates. The alchemist understands that the gold is found by going into the darkness, not by avoiding it. The treasure is buried. You must dig through the mud to find it. Toxic positivity keeps you on the surface, smiling in the sunlight, never descending to where the real work happens. It is the avoidance strategy disguised as enlightenment. It is spiritual materialism, collecting positive vibes the way some people collect possessions, hoping that enough accumulated positivity will insulate you from the reality of being human. But you are human, and being human means experiencing the full range: joy and sorrow, love and rage, courage and fear, peace and anxiety, all of it. To deny half the spectrum is to live as a half-person. You become two-dimensional. You lose depth, complexity, authenticity. You become a motivational poster instead of a human being. And motivational posters do not create art, do not change the world, do not love deeply, do not live fully. They just hang on walls and collect dust. The liberation comes when you release the requirement to feel positive. When you give yourself permission to feel whatever you actually feel without labeling it as spiritual failure. When you understand that your anger does not mean you are unenlightened, your grief does not mean you are not manifesting correctly, your fear does not mean you lack faith, it means you are alive, it means you are paying attention, it means you have not numbed yourself into spiritual bypassed oblivion. And from this honest place, you can begin the real work of transmutation. Transmutation is not the same as suppression. Suppression says, "This feeling is bad, and I will not feel it." Transmutation says, "This feeling is energy, and I will direct it." Suppression creates toxicity. Transmutation creates thrust. The difference is acknowledgement. You must first admit what is true before you can work with it. The alchemist does not lie to himself about what he is feeling. He feels it fully, and then he assigns it a purpose. This is integrity. This is honest practice. This is the path that actually leads somewhere, instead of just maintaining the illusion that you have already arrived. Chapter 6: Sexual Transmutation. Of all the energies available to the human organism, sexual energy is the most concentrated, the most powerful, and the most consistently misunderstood and misused. Sexual energy is not merely the urge toward physical union. It is the creative force of the universe expressing itself through your biology. It is the raw desire to merge, to create, to generate new forms. This energy can be spent in momentary pleasure, producing nothing but temporary relief. Or it can be transmuted into lasting achievement, producing genius, charisma, and works that outlive the body. The choice is yours, but few make it consciously. Napoleon Hill, in his study of high-achieving individuals, noted that nearly all of them possessed unusually strong sexual drives and, more importantly, had learned to redirect that energy toward their work rather than dissipating it through constant physical expression. This was not about repression or denial. This was about conscious conservation and redirection. They were not suppressing the energy. They were channeling it upward, using it to fuel creativity, productivity, and force of personality. They had discovered, either intuitively or through practice, the technique of sexual transmutation. The mechanism is straightforward. Sexual arousal generates a specific energetic state in the body. Blood flow increases, the nervous system activates, creativity spikes, focus sharpens. The entire organism mobilizes toward a single purpose: union and creation. This mobilization of resources is not limited to the sexual act. It is a general mobilization of creative potential. The body and mind do not distinguish between creating a child and creating a business, between merging with a partner and merging with an idea. The energy is the same, the application is variable. Most people spend this energy as quickly as it accumulates. The pressure builds, they release it, and they return to baseline. This cycle repeats endlessly. Build, release, baseline. Build, release, baseline. Each release provides momentary satisfaction, but leaves no residue, no accumulated power. The person remains at the same level of vitality and magnetism, never building beyond their current capacity. They are spending their creative currency on small purchases instead of investing it for compound returns. The alchemist recognizes sexual energy as premium fuel. When the energy rises, instead of immediately seeking release, he consciously redirects it. The technique is ancient, found in Taoist practices, tantric traditions, and various mystical schools under different names. The core method is the same. When arousal builds, you do not suppress it and you do not release it. You breathe it upward. You visualize the energy moving from the base of the spine up through the central channel to the brain. You literally imagine yourself drawing the heat up, moving it from the lower centers to the higher centers. This is not metaphor. Practitioners report distinct sensations when doing this correctly. A warmth or tingling that moves up the spine, a pressure in the head, a sudden clarity of mind, a surge of creative insight. The energy that was pooled in the sexual center becomes available for use by the entire system. The brain, now flooded with this concentrated life force, operates at enhanced capacity. Ideas come faster. Solutions appear. Creative blocks dissolve. This is not mystical fantasy. This is practical energy management. The benefits are multiple and measurable. First, sustained sexual energy increases overall vitality. You feel more alive, more magnetic, more present. People respond to you differently without consciously knowing why. You are broadcasting a frequency of concentrated life force, and human nervous systems are attuned to detect this signal. This is charisma. This is presence. This is the indefinable quality that makes certain people compelling, regardless of their physical appearance or social status. Second, transmuted sexual energy becomes available as creative fuel. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, scientists, anyone engaged in creative work, can access a deeper reservoir of inspiration and endurance when they practice sexual transmutation. The urge to create is fundamentally sexual. It is the desire to bring something new into existence, to merge disparate elements into novel forms. When you redirect sexual energy toward your creative projects, you are not fighting against your biology. You are using it as it was designed to be used. Third, the practice develops tremendous willpower. Sexual energy is one of the strongest biological drives. To feel that drive and consciously redirect it, rather than immediately satisfying it, requires and develops mental discipline. Each time you successfully transmute sexual energy, you strengthen your capacity for delayed gratification, for choosing long-term gain over immediate pleasure. This capacity transfers to all other areas of life. The person who can master their sexual impulse can master anything. The technique requires practice. Initially, attempting to redirect sexual energy may feel awkward or ineffective. Your body is habituated to the release pattern. Your nervous system has grooved pathways that lead directly from arousal to release. You are creating new pathways, and like any new skill, this requires repetition and patience. Start with periods of containment, hours, then days, while consciously practicing the upward draw. Do not force it. Do not create tension. Simply breathe, visualize, and allow. There is a critical distinction to make. This is not about becoming celibate or renouncing sexuality. Sexual transmutation can be practiced within an active sexual life. You can engage in sexual activity and still practice periods of transmutation. The key is conscious choice rather than automatic release. Many practitioners find that sexual experiences become more intense and satisfying when they are interspersed with periods of transmutation. The energy has time to build, to concentrate, and when it is finally released in sacred union, the release is more profound. The Taoist tradition speaks of retaining essence, of allowing the energy to circulate rather than being expelled. Modern practitioners might not adopt the full Taoist approach, but the principle holds: periodic retention and redirection increases vitality. You can experiment with your own rhythm. Perhaps you engage in full release once a week while practicing transmutation the rest of the time. Perhaps you practice retention for a month during a particularly demanding creative project. You adjust based on what serves your goals. There is also a shadow side worth addressing. Sexual energy, like any powerful force, can distort if mishandled. The practice of transmutation without proper intention can lead to increased aggression, restlessness, or obsessive behavior. The energy must have a clear channel. If you are redirecting sexual energy away from physical release, but not directing it toward anything specific, it becomes aimless and potentially destructive. This is why the practice requires a clear purpose. You are transmuting the energy for something, a project, a goal, a creative work. The something provides the channel. Additionally, if sexual energy is transmuted while holding toxic beliefs about sexuality itself, shame, guilt, self-judgment, those toxins get amplified along with the energy. You must first establish a healthy relationship with your sexuality before attempting transmutation. If you view sexual desire as sinful or shameful, transmuting it will only intensify the internal conflict. The alchemist views sexual energy as sacred fuel, not as moral failing. This perspective is essential for clean transmutation. The process of upward draw can be enhanced with breathwork. Specific breathing patterns help move energy through the body. One common technique: inhale deeply while consciously contracting the pelvic floor, imagining you are drawing energy up from the base of the spine. Hold briefly at the top of the inhale while visualizing the energy reaching the crown of the head. Exhale slowly, relaxing but maintaining awareness of the energy now distributed through the upper body. Repeat this cycle several times while arousal is present. The breath acts as a pump, moving the energy along the desired pathway. Over time, consistent practice of sexual transmutation alters your baseline state. You carry more vitality even when not actively aroused. Your creative capacity increases, your mental clarity sharpens, your presence intensifies. You become a more concentrated version of yourself. People notice, opportunities appear, not because you are performing some magical ritual, but because you are operating at higher wattage, and the world responds to power. There is ancient wisdom embedded in this practice, wisdom that predates modern psychology and neuroscience, but that modern research is beginning to validate. Studies on delayed gratification, on the relationship between testosterone and achievement, on the neurochemistry of desire, all of these point toward what the ancients knew intuitively, that the creative impulse and the sexual impulse are the same impulse expressing through different channels. Master the root energy, and you master its expressions. The Crimson Key teaches that all energy is fuel, but sexual energy is rocket fuel. It is the most condensed, the most potent, the most immediately available source of creative power you possess. To waste it in unconscious release is to waste your advantage. To transmute it through conscious practice is to unlock potential that most people never access. The alchemist knows this. The alchemist treats his sexual energy as he would treat refined gold, carefully, reverently, and with clear intention. Every ounce is spent toward a purpose. Nothing is wasted. And from this discipline comes power that those who spend freely will never understand. Chapter 7. The Alchemical Process. The alchemical process of emotional transmutation is not abstract theory. It is a concrete method with specific steps that can be practiced and refined. What follows is the technical manual for converting raw emotional energy into directed thrust. This process works regardless of the emotion you are transmuting: anger, grief, fear, desire. because it operates at the level of energy mechanics rather than emotional content. Master this process and you master yourself. Step 1. Observation without identification. The first requirement is the development of the observer, the part of you that can witness your own experience without being consumed by it. When an emotion arises, the untrained person becomes the emotion. They say, "I am angry," as if the anger is their identity. The alchemist says, "I am experiencing anger," or more precisely, "I am observing anger moving through my system." This distinction is not semantic. It is the difference between being the storm and being the sky through which the storm moves. To develop the observer, practice catching yourself in emotional states and inserting a small pause before reacting. In that pause, describe what you are feeling in physical terms rather than emotional labels. Not "I am furious," but "I feel heat in my chest, tension in my jaw, an urge to move forward aggressively." Not "I am devastated," but "I feel a heaviness in my chest, a tightness in my throat, a sensation of collapse inward." This description practice creates distance. You are no longer merged with the emotion, you are observing it as a phenomenon. The power of this step cannot be overstated. Most people's lives are controlled by unconscious emotional reactions. Something happens, they feel an emotion, and they automatically act from that emotion without any conscious choice occurring. Stimulus, emotion, reaction. The observer creates a gap in that chain. Stimulus, emotion, observation, choice, response. The observation creates the space for choice, and in that space, transmutation becomes possible. Step 2. Dissociation from the energy. Once you have observed the emotion, the next step is to fully dissociate from it. You realize that you are not the energy. You are the consciousness that is aware of the energy. The energy is weather moving through you. You are the landscape. This dissociation is liberating because it removes the personal identification that makes emotions so controlling. When you believe you are your anger directs you. When you realize you have anger, that it is an energetic event occurring within your system, you reclaim authority. A useful visualization. Imagine yourself as the sky. Emotions are clouds moving across the sky. Some clouds are dark and heavy with rain. Some are light and wispy. But you are not the clouds. You are the sky. The clouds move through and the sky remains. Even in the midst of the most intense storm, there is, above the clouds, blue sky and sunlight. That unchanging awareness is what you are. The emotions are temporary weather patterns. This dissociation does not mean you become cold or detached from your life. It means you stop being jerked around by every emotional fluctuation. You maintain your center, even as strong emotions move through. You can feel fully without being controlled completely. This is sovereignty. This is the stance of the alchemist, engaged with the experience, but not overwhelmed by it. Step 3. Recognition of energy, type, and voltage. Different emotions have different energetic signatures and different useful applications. Anger is high voltage, aggressive, forward-moving energy. Grief is deep, expanding, inward-opening energy. Fear is intense, focused, rehearsal energy. Joy is light, expansive, attractive energy. Sexual energy is creative, merging, generative energy. Once you have observed and dissociated from the emotion, you then identify what type of energy you are working with and what its natural voltage and direction are. This recognition allows you to match the energy to an appropriate task. High-voltage anger is not suited for detailed analytical work. It is too aggressive, too scattered. But it is perfectly suited for breaking through resistance, for making difficult phone calls, for intense physical training, for any task that requires pushing through barriers. Low-voltage contentment is not sufficient for rapid transformation, but it is excellent for maintenance tasks, for steady progress, for work that requires patience and consistency. The alchemist becomes skilled at reading his own energy field and matching available energy to necessary tasks. If you have high anger and low motivation, you do not waste the anger by suppressing it or spending it on an argument. You assign it to the task that requires that energy, perhaps the project you have been avoiding, perhaps the difficult conversation you need to have, perhaps the physical challenge you have been putting off. Step 4. Assignment of purpose. This is the pivot point of transmutation. You have observed the emotion. You have dissociated from it. You have identified its type and voltage. Now you command it. You speak to the energy, silently or aloud, and you assign it a specific task. I assign this anger to completing my project proposal. I assign this fear intensity to visualizing my successful presentation. I assign this grief depth to writing from a more authentic place. I assign this sexual energy to creative breakthrough on my artwork. The assignment must be specific and immediate. You cannot assign today's anger to a task you plan to do next month. The energy is available now. It must be spent now. If you have anger and no appropriate task immediately available, you can assign it to physical exertion. Go for a run, do burpees, hit a heavy bag. The key is that the energy must be directed into action while it is still active. Speaking the assignment clearly, even if only internally, creates a mental contract. You are establishing a new pathway in your nervous system. The emotion that normally leads to either suppression or explosion is now being routed toward productive action. With repetition, this routing becomes automatic. Eventually, you will reach a state where negative emotions automatically convert to thrust without requiring conscious intervention. But initially, the conscious command is necessary. Step 5. Immediate action. While energy is hot. Assignment without action is fantasy. Once you have commanded the energy toward a task, you must immediately begin that task while the energy is still active. Do not wait for the emotion to pass and then do the work. Use the emotion to fuel the work. This is critical. The transmutation happens in the doing. The anger that would have been wasted in an argument becomes 50 pages of writing. The fear that would have paralyzed you becomes rehearsal so thorough that you are over-prepared. The grief that would have collapsed you becomes art that moves others. You will notice a qualitative difference in work done while channeling strong emotion versus work done from a neutral state. The emotional energy adds intensity, adds depth, adds a particular quality that neutral work often lacks. Musicians who perform while channeling deep emotion create performances that audiences remember for years. Writers who access their anger or grief produce work that resonates at a primal level. This is not accidental. This is transmutation in action. The energy that could have destroyed is instead creating. There is a window. The emotional energy, if not directed, will dissipate or discharge in some other way. You have perhaps 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the intensity and your skill level, to channel the energy productively. After that window, the voltage drops, and while you can still work, you have lost the enhanced capacity that the emotion provided. This is why immediate action is essential. Strike while the iron is hot. Burn the fuel while it is in the combustion chamber. Step 6. Sustaining the channel through completion. Some tasks can be completed within the window of a single emotional surge. Others require sustained effort over days or weeks. For longer tasks, you must learn to maintain the channel even as the initial emotional intensity fades. This is done through a combination of memory and re-triggering. You remember the emotional state that initiated the work. You recall the anger or fear or grief that gave birth to the project, and periodically, you consciously re-access that emotional state to refuel your work. This is not wallowing. This is not dwelling unnecessarily on negative emotion. This is strategic re-access. If you are working on a project born from anger at injustice, you can periodically remind yourself of the injustice to rekindle the fire. If you are working on something born from grief depth, you can briefly touch the grief again to deepen your work. You are using the emotion as an ally, a resource to be called upon as needed. Over time, the project itself becomes self-sustaining. The initial emotional fuel gets you started, but momentum and commitment carry you forward. This is ideal. You do not want to remain in negative emotional states perpetually, but you also do not want to forget the fire that initiated your movement. The alchemist holds both, the memory of the pain that started the journey and the vision of the goal that will complete it. Step 7. Observation of results and refinement. After you have practiced transmutation several times, you begin to observe patterns. You notice which emotions transmute most effectively into which types of action. You notice how long your window is before the energy dissipates. You notice which assignment commands work best for you. You notice what circumstances trigger which emotions and how you can position yourself to have the right fuel available for the right tasks. This observation allows you to refine your practice. You become more efficient. You waste less energy. You become able to transmute emotions more quickly, more completely, more elegantly. What initially required conscious effort becomes semi-automatic. Eventually, it becomes your default operating mode. Negative emotion arises, and before you even consciously register it, your system has already assigned it to something productive and initiated action. This is mastery. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become an efficient conductor, to waste no energy, to transmute everything, to be able to operate at full capacity regardless of what emotional fuel is currently available. The alchemist running on anger produces as much valuable work as the alchemist running on joy, perhaps more, because anger provides higher voltage. The external circumstances that generate the emotions become less relevant because all fuel burns equally well in a properly designed engine. This 7-step process is the core technology of the Crimson Key. It is simple but not easy. It requires honest self-observation, willingness to feel intensely without acting out, and the discipline to direct energy toward purpose rather than discharge. But every repetition strengthens the pathways. Every successful transmutation builds your capacity for the next one. And over time, you transform yourself from someone controlled by emotional weather into someone who uses that weather to power your flight. The storm no longer grounds you. It lifts you. Our Chapter 8, the untouchable state. The culmination of the alchemical practice is the achievement of the untouchable state, a mode of being in which external circumstances lose their power to destabilize you because you have learned to convert all inputs into fuel. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not toxic positivity. This is not pretending that pain does not hurt. This is the development of such efficient internal alchemy that pain becomes merely another form of energy to be processed and directed. You become invincible not because nothing can harm you, but because everything that touches you makes you stronger. The untouchable state is the natural result of consistent transmutation practice. In the beginning, you transmute emotions laboriously, consciously following the 7-step process each time. Over time, the process becomes automatic. Your nervous system learns the pattern. Negative emotion arises, and before your conscious mind fully registers it, your system has already assigned it to productive use and initiated action. The gap between feeling and transmuting collapses. You become a real-time processor of all experience. What this means in practical terms is radical freedom. The person in the untouchable state is not controlled by the need to avoid pain. They do not structure their entire life around comfort and safety. They can take risks that would paralyze others because they know that even if the risk results in failure, betrayal, or loss, they will simply transmute that pain into fuel for the next attempt. Failure is not a threat. It is a delivery of raw material. Rejection is not something to fear. It is more anger fuel to power the next approach. Consider two people facing identical challenges. Person A has not developed transmutation capacity. When they are rejected, they become discouraged. When they fail, they question themselves. When they are betrayed, they become bitter. Each negative experience depletes their energy and momentum. They must recover, heal, rebuild confidence before they can try again. This recovery time is expensive. It slows everything down. And if the hits come frequently enough, they may stop trying altogether. Person B has developed the untouchable state through consistent practice. When they are rejected, they immediately feel the sting, acknowledge the anger or grief, and assign that energy to improving their pitch or their product or themselves. When they fail, they extract the lesson while the experience is still fresh, then use the frustration as fuel to immediately implement what they learned. When they are betrayed, they feel the full weight of the grief, let it carve them deeper, and emerge with enhanced discernment and stronger boundaries. Each negative experience adds to their capacity rather than depleting it. Person B moves faster. They accomplish more, not because they are more talented or more fortunate, but because they have eliminated recovery time. They have learned to convert damage into thrust in real time. They are not slowed by the wounds that slow others. They are accelerated by them. This is the advantage of the untouchable state. This is why the alchemist, over time, pulls ahead of everyone operating from conventional emotional management strategies. The untouchable state also creates a particular kind of presence that others find compelling. When you are genuinely unshakable, not because you avoid challenges, but because you can metabolize anything, you emit a frequency of confidence that is unmistakable. People feel it without understanding what they are feeling. They perceive strength, reliability, a certain dangerous quality that is both attractive and intimidating. This is not manufactured charisma. This is the natural magnetism of someone who cannot be broken. This state does not mean you become cold or unfeeling. You still experience the full range of emotion. You still feel joy and grief and anger and fear. The difference is that these emotions move through you without leaving residue. They do not accumulate into bitterness, resentment, chronic anxiety, or depression. They arise, they are processed, they are transmuted, and they release. You remain clear. You remain available. You remain capable of responding freshly to each new moment rather than carrying the weight of unprocessed past moments. One of the most profound shifts that occurs in the untouchable state is the relationship to challenge. The untransformed person views challenges as obstacles, as problems, as unwanted difficulties to be avoided or endured. The person in the untouchable state views challenges as opportunities, as delivered fuel, as the universe providing exactly the friction necessary for the next level of growth. The reframe is complete. Nothing that happens is bad anymore. Everything is useful. This does not mean you seek pain masochistically. You still prefer comfort when possible. You still choose the easier path when it is aligned with your goals. But when the difficult path is necessary, when pain arrives unbidden, when circumstances turn against you, you do not collapse. You do not rage against reality. You simply observe what energy has been delivered, assign it to something productive, and continue moving forward. The universe cannot stop you because every attempt to stop you only fuels your advance. The political prisoner who uses his isolation to develop philosophy that changes the world demonstrates the untouchable state. The betrayed lover who uses the grief to create art that defines a generation demonstrates the untouchable state. The entrepreneur who fails multiple times and uses each failure as research, as feedback, as fuel until they finally succeed demonstrates the untouchable state. These are not people to whom nothing bad happens. These are people who have learned to alchemize everything. There is a subtle danger here worth noting. The person who achieves the untouchable state can become so efficient at transmuting pain that they sometimes fail to establish appropriate boundaries. They can endure toxic situations longer than they should because they are capable of processing the toxicity. They might stay in abusive relationships, exploitative jobs, or harmful environments because they have become so skilled at converting the damage into fuel that they forget they could also just leave. The solution is to maintain the alchemist's pragmatism. Yes, you can transmute anything. But why would you choose to transmute low-grade fuel when high-grade fuel is available? Why remain in a situation that generates anger daily when you could redesign your circumstances to generate joy daily? Both anger and joy can fuel manifestation, but joy is more pleasant to work with. The untouchable state gives you the ability to endure anything. But use that ability for strategic endurance, not for martyrdom. Another aspect of the untouchable state is the elimination of victimhood. The victim identity requires believing that you have been damaged in ways that justify your current limitations. The person in the untouchable state has often been damaged more severely than those who identify as victims. But they refuse the identity because they know it is a trap. They know that the victim story, however true, is also a cage. They choose the alchemist story instead. I was given raw materials and I built something from them. This is not denial of harm. This is refusal to let harm define you. You were betrayed, that is a fact. You were abused, that is a fact. You were dealt an unfair hand, that is a fact. And also, you are not bound by these facts. You can use them as fuel rather than as excuses. You can be someone these things happen to without being someone these things happen to. The distinction is everything. One identity traps you in the past. The other frees you to create the future. The untouchable state is not a permanent arrival. It is a practice you return to again and again. Even the most skilled alchemist will occasionally be knocked off center by a sufficiently powerful blow. The difference is in recovery time. The master might be down for hours instead of months. They might need a day to process what would take others a year, and they do not judge themselves for being affected. They simply notice they are down, feel what needs to be felt, transmute what is available to transmute, and return to center. Over years of practice, you build such deep reserves that it takes increasingly powerful forces to move you. You become like an old-growth tree. Your roots go so deep that storms that would uproot saplings merely cause you to sway. And even if a storm powerful enough to uproot you arrives, you know you will grow back. You have died and been reborn enough times that death no longer terrifies you. You are made of resurrections. The final characteristic of the untouchable state is a particular quality of peace. Not the peace of someone who has avoided war, but the peace of someone who has survived every war and learned that they are indestructible. This peace is not passive. It is not quiet. It is the peace of a nuclear reactor humming at full capacity, controlled, contained, but ready to release enormous energy at any moment. It is the peace of a blade that has been forged, tempered, sharpened, and sheathed, resting but not rusting, calm but not complacent, still but not inactive. You will know you have achieved the untouchable state when you notice yourself becoming curious about challenges rather than afraid of them. When betrayal arrives and your first thought is, "How will I use this?" instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" When loss occurs and you sit with the grief fully while simultaneously noting that it is carving you deeper for future joy. When the world throws everything at you and you just keep converting it to thrust, this is mastery. This is freedom. This is the state that makes you truly dangerous to the forces of entropy and mediocrity. You have become someone who cannot be stopped because everything that touches you makes you stronger. Epilogue: The Golden Ash. You have now received the complete transmission of the Crimson Key. You understand that emotions are energy, that energy is neutral, and that the difference between suffering and power is nothing more than direction. You have learned the specific technologies for transmuting anger into thrust, grief into depth, fear into focus, and sexual energy into creative force. You have learned the 7-step alchemical process. You have learned that the goal is not transcendence of negativity, but mastery of transmutation. And you have glimpsed the possibility of the untouchable state, the condition of becoming someone whom the universe can no longer hurt because you have learned to burn everything for fuel. Now comes the most critical question. What will you do with this knowledge? The transmission has been delivered, but transmission alone changes nothing. Knowledge that remains theoretical is worthless. The alchemist is not someone who knows the process. The alchemist is someone who performs the process. You must take this understanding out of the conceptual realm and into lived practice. You must test it against reality. You must apply it to your actual pain, your actual challenges, your actual emotional weather. Only then will you discover whether these principles are true. And they are true. But you must prove it to yourself through application. The next time anger rises in you, do not suppress it and do not explode it. Stop, breathe, feel where it lives in your body. Acknowledge that this is high-voltage energy demanding change. Assign it to something productive, a project, a workout, a difficult conversation. Act while the energy is still hot. Notice what happens. Notice how much you accomplish when anger fuels your motion. Notice that the anger, once properly spent, dissipates cleanly, leaving no toxic residue. The next time grief arrives, do not rush through it. Do not medicate it with substances or distractions or premature positive reframes. Sit with it. Let it carve you. Feel the depth opening inside you. Trust that this excavation is making room for greater capacity. Notice that the grief, when fully felt and honored, eventually transforms into a quiet strength. Notice that you emerge more tender, but also more resilient. Notice that you can hold more love, more joy, more complexity, because the grief widened your container. The next time fear activates, do not label it as weakness or evidence of lack. Recognize it as proof of your visualization power. Feel the intensity of the fear state. Then, maintaining that intensity, consciously shift the image from catastrophe to triumph. Use the same shaking, the same focus, the same visceral belief, but point it at success instead of failure. Act from this redirected state. Notice that you perform with enhanced capacity when fear energy is channeling through you toward a positive target. As you practice these transmutations, you will accumulate evidence. Each successful conversion of pain into power will strengthen your trust in the process. Each time you emerge from darkness with something valuable, you will become less afraid of the dark. Each time you use suffering as fuel and watch yourself accelerate, you will stop seeing suffering as the enemy. It will become just another form of energy, sometimes more useful than pleasure because of its intensity. Over time, your relationship to your own experience will fundamentally shift. You will stop asking, "Why is this happening to me, Ma?" and start asking, "How will I use this?" You will stop dividing experiences into good and bad and start dividing them into high voltage and low voltage, useful and not yet useful, processed and not yet processed. You will become pragmatic about pain in the same way you are pragmatic about pleasure. Both are fuel. Both can be spent. The question is only, what will you buy with your suffering? The world is full of people who have suffered immensely and have nothing to show for it but bitterness and brokenness. Their suffering was real. Their pain was legitimate. But they did not know how to transmute it. They let the energy destroy them or dissipate into the air unused. They are proof that suffering alone does not ennoble. Suffering alone does not teach. Suffering alone just hurts. It is transmuted suffering that creates the master. You now have the advantage that most people do not have. You know the technology exists. You know that pain can be converted to power. You know that the lead in your basement can become gold if you are willing to do the work. This knowledge is responsibility. You can no longer honestly claim that your past pain has crippled you. It has fueled you. You can no longer claim that your negative emotions control you. They serve you if you are willing to command them. This is the moment of choice. You can return to your old patterns, treating emotions as random weather that happens to you, or you can step into the role of alchemist, treating emotions as raw materials to be processed. You can continue being a victim of your own energy, or you can become its master. The difference between these two paths is not talent or circumstance, it is decision followed by practice. Decide now. Practice daily. The results will speak for themselves. Understand that mastery does not happen overnight. The alchemist is not someone who has achieved permanent transcendence. The alchemist is someone who returns to the practice again and again, refining their technique, deepening their capacity, becoming more efficient with each cycle. You will forget. You will slip back into old patterns. You will waste energy. This is expected. This is part of the process. The question is not whether you will forget, but how quickly you remember. How quickly can you catch yourself suppressing and shift back to transmuting? How quickly can you notice you are wasting fuel and redirect it to something productive? The practice builds on itself. Each successful transmutation makes the next one easier. Each time you channel anger into productivity, the neural pathway strengthens. Each time you sit with grief and allow it to expand you, your capacity increases. Each time you redirect fear toward focused visualization, the technique becomes more automatic. You're not just accomplishing tasks, you are rewiring your nervous system, you are building new default responses, you are becoming a different kind of human, and as you change, your impact changes. The person who has mastered transmutation becomes a leader, whether they seek leadership or not, because others recognize the power. They recognize someone who cannot be broken. They recognize someone who moves forward regardless of circumstances. They recognize someone who has found a source of fuel that never runs dry because it comes from life itself. And life will always provide contrast, will always provide challenges, will always provide friction. The alchemist has learned to love friction because friction generates heat and heat runs engines. Your suffering was never meaningless. It was never random. It was never punishment. It was fuel delivery. The universe has been stockpiling energy for you in the form of pain, waiting for you to learn how to spend it. Every moment of anger you have felt was voltage waiting to be directed. Every moment of grief was excavation, preparing you for greater capacity. Every moment of fear was rehearsal that could have been redirected toward desired outcomes. All of it was preparation. All of it was resource accumulation. And now you have the instruction manual. Do not waste another tear. Do not waste another sleepless night. Do not waste another moment of rage or heartbreak or terror. These are your inheritance. These are the materials the universe has given you to build your life from. If you have suffered greatly, congratulations. You are rich. You have enormous reserves of raw material. Now light the furnace. Now begin the great work. Now transmute everything you have been given into everything you intend to become. The crimson key has been placed in your hand. You stand now at the door of the furnace. The fuel is stacked and waiting. All that remains is to strike the match, to begin the burn, to watch as your pain transforms into power, your suffering into substance, your lead into gold. This is not metaphor. This is method. This is your inheritance and your instruction. The time is now. The choice is yours. Turn the key. Open the door. Let the fire begin. Do not waste a single tear. Turn it into gold. The transmission is complete.